And apologies for just now. Something went wrong with my connection, but here I am back and live with my live bibliotherapy session tonight, which is all about islands in literature. And I was just explaining that I'm the resident in-house bibliotherapist for Damien Barr's literary salon. I've been working as a bibliotherapist for the last 10 years at all of Damien's wonderful salons around the world. And this time last year, we were on board the Queen Mary 2, traveling from New York to Southampton with the Cheltenham Literary Festival at sea, which was a wonderful and fantastic experience, and rather like being on an island. So tonight, thanks so much, by the way, everyone, for returning, and sorry about the earlier glitch. I'm going to be investigating islands in literature and why it is that we love islands in literature. What is it about them that makes us keep coming back to them? I do feel that in this particular year, when many of us have felt extremely isolated, and it has been a year of particular angst and lack of communication with others, many of us have felt as though we've been living on an island of our own making, or perhaps wishing that we did. We've all fantasized about living on desert islands, and particularly maybe in our childhood wondered how we would survive such a thing. And with lockdown restrictions, we felt more and more as if we are castaways from civilization. So tonight, this is your perfect opportunity to escape into fictional islands in literature. And we're going to talk about some of the fictional islands that we love the best. I would like to start by thinking about what it is about islands that we really love, and why do we turn to books to find out more about them. I feel that books, in a way, are islands themselves. They're little worlds which have boundaries in the form of the covers. Even if they're not physical books, we can feel the boundaries of those books. Good evening, David and Estelle. Great to have you here tonight. And I hope that you were not trying to get on to the session earlier when I was having problems connecting. So welcome, and welcome to the other people that are joining now. So why do we love islands in books? Books are a little island. They're a place where we can escape. We can go into the book for excitement, adventure, the unknown. The book might be full of treasure, of murder, of mystery, and of romance, intrigue, love, danger, joy, and bliss. In short, everything that you can find in life can be found in a book, which is just like an island. If it's a book about an island, it's even more exciting. And Gavin Francis is one of the people that I'm going to be talking about tonight, who's actually written a book called Island Dreams, which is all about his own passion for islands. And he puts our love of islands very well, I think, and explains what I was just talking about far better than I did. He says, I realise that often in adult life, I've considered books as portable islands, in the way that they grant isolation from one's surroundings, offering relief from immediate demands and space for contemplation. More and more, as we grow older, great novels declare their authority, wrote Helen Dunmore. They will certainly outlive us, like sea or rock or sand. We can inhabit their world for a while and be changed by it, but they are forever moving beyond us to the next generation. So that's Gavin Francis talking about how books are like islands. And I think that is one of the reasons that we love books so much, and islands too. So one of the most early and classic novels about an island, which we can't have an evening about islands without mentioning, is Robinson Crusoe, written in 1719, which has claims for being one of the earliest novels of any kind, let alone one of the earliest novels about islands. It was an epistolary novel, and it was written as if it was true fact, because Daniel Defoe put in his preface that he was told this true story by the teller, by Robinson Crusoe himself. And it's about a man who spent 28 years as a castaway. It's an epic story, and I'm sure that many of you will have read it, or at least read versions of it. And it has so many reasons to be popular, one of which is that it was the first of its kind. But all the preoccupations that Robinson Crusoe has in his book are the same ones that have then been handed down to us as later 21st century readers, and they're still relevant. They're still the same things that we head for when we read modern day island novels. So I'm going to read you a little bit from Robinson Crusoe to remind you what are the kind of things that we often think about when we're reading island literature. I was now landed and safe on shore, and began to look up and thank God that my life was saved, in a case wherein there was some minutes before scarce any room to hope. I believe it is impossible to express to the life what the ecstasies and transports of the soul are when it is so saved, as I may say, out of the very grave. And I do not wonder now at the custom, when a malefactor who has the halter about his neck is tied up and just going to be turned off and has a reprieve brought to him. I say, I do not wonder that they bring a surgeon with it to let him blood that very moment they tell him of it, that the surprise may not drive the animal spirits from the heart and overwhelm him. That's quite a bizarre thought, isn't it, to think that if a man about to be hung is given the reprieve, someone should turn up to let his blood because he's feeling so shocked that he needs to release some of his blood. And that's how Robinson Crusoe felt when he arrived on his island and realized that he was still alive and had survived the storm. For sudden joys, like griefs, confound at first. I walked about on the shore, lifting up my hands, and my whole being, as I may say, wrapped up in a contemplation of my deliverance, making 1,000 gestures and motions which I cannot describe, reflecting upon all my comrades that were drowned, and that there should not be one soul saved but myself. For as for them, I never saw them afterwards, or any sign of them, except 3 of their hats, 1 cap, and 2 shoes that were not fellows. I cast my eye to the stranded vessel, when the breach and froth of the sea, being so big I could hardly see it, it lay so far off, and considered, Lord, how was it possible I could get on shore? After I had solaced my mind with the comfortable part of my condition, I began to look around me, to see what kind of place I was in, and what was next to be done. And I soon found my comforts abate, and that, in a word, I had a dreadful deliverance, for I was wet and had no clothes to shift me, nor anything either to eat or drink or comfort me. Neither did I see any prospect before me but that of perishing with hunger or being devoured by wild beasts. And that which was particularly afflicting to me was that I had no weapon, either to hunt and kill any creature for my sustenance, or to defend myself against any other creature that might desire to kill me for theirs. In a word, I had nothing but a knife, a tobacco pipe, and a little tobacco in a box. For people just joining, I'm reading quite near the beginning of Robinson Crusoe and reminding us why it is that we love desert island books particularly. And one of the reasons that we love them is because they show us how people survive in extreme circumstances. And we all love to fantasize about whether we would survive in such a case, how we would do it. That's why we love listening to Desert Islandists as well, and thinking about what would be the luxury that we would like to have with us. How would we cope if we were washed up on shore with nothing but, not even a knife, nothing but a tin of tobacco? And it's the fact that Robinson Crusoe does succeed and masters his situation and survives there for 28 years that makes us admire him in a way, and feel like maybe we would be similarly successful, or we would like to be. He tames wild goats. He succeeds in farming. He sows seeds. He constantly blames himself for his past sins. And there's a lot of religion in the book as he reads the Bible and turns to God and feels repentant for all the things that he's done. And he often relates his successes to his repentance. And he also obsessively keeps a journal to record his daily activities. And all of these are classic scenarios for a desert island book. And there's something very nerdy and satisfying about all those notations and measurements and records that Robinson Crusoe takes while he spends his time on the island. And I think there's a lot of people that really enjoy those minutiae of life and love to think about exactly the dimensions of Robinson Crusoe's hut, and the first raft that he tries to build, the first boat which he digs out of a log and then tries to drag down to the shore, but it's too heavy. And he feels that every time he has a setback, he is stronger and he can continue. And he is very much a moral man, constantly measuring and numbering. He also very much takes the attitude on his island that he needs to eat or be eaten. There are cannibals that visit his island and he has to fend them off and at times literally kill them in order to survive. And even when he does escape his island eventually and come back to Europe, he has to fend off wolves. So as he crosses the Pyrenees. So it's very much a book about harsh survival, eating or being eaten, and also about farming. And this is a common theme in many an island book. Another more recent desert island book, which many of you might have read, is a book for kids by Michael Morpurgo called Kensuke's Kingdom. It's very much a Robinson Crusoe kind of story, which is about a boy called Michael who set sail with his parents round the world on a jaunt when they've decided to take a year out and go and have a mighty adventure, and they bring their dog with them too. But a terrible storm comes up and whips Michael off the deck of his boat, and he's swept onto a desert island. And at first he thinks that all is lost, but then he meets a man called Kensuke, who is Japanese and is a survivor, as it turns out, of the Second World War. And they initially have a very frosty relationship, but they slowly begin to make friends. Kensuke's Kingdom is a really lovely story, and it is a story of survival. It's also a tale of how two very different people from very different worlds begin to get to know each other and understand each other. And it is a really lovely and inspiring book, which could not have been written, frankly, if it wasn't for Robinson Crusoe, like so many of these castaway style books. Another one that very much comes to mind, which is also very heavily dependent on Robinson Crusoe and makes a lot of references to it, is Umberto Eco's The Island of the Day Before, which is a big book and a strange one, which is one that is full of action and adventure, but at the same time, it's very rambly and very philosophical. And it's very much about the nature of time, because it's about a man who is stranded. He's actually been swept off a ship, and then he's travelled for miles and miles through the sea and been cast away onto another ship. And the ship that he finds himself on is called the Daphne, and it mysteriously is very dry, full of water, full of food, and almost looks as if it's just been left, like the Marie Celeste, minutes before he turned up there himself. So it's very mysterious, and it slowly becomes apparent that Roberto, our hero, is pretty much stuck forever on this boat, which is also very close to the shore of an island. So our castaway, Roberto, is staring at this island, which is probably only about 100 feet away. But there's no way that he can get to the island because he can't swim. We slowly understand, as the novel progresses, that even if he could swim, he would still not be able to reach the island, because the island is the island of the day before. He would have to cross the meridian line and go back in time in order to reach that island. So he is forever trapped on his boat. A nice situation for a castaway. His feet solidly planted and dry land within reach. But Roberto was unable to swim. Soon he would discover there was no longboat on board, and the current, meanwhile, had carried away the plank on which he had arrived. Hence his relief at having escaped death was now accompanied by dismay at this terrible solitude of the sea, the neighbouring island, and the ship. Ahoy! He must have tried to shout on the ship in every language he knew, discovering how weak he truly was. Silence. As if on board everyone was dead. And never had he, so generous with similes, expressed himself more literally. Or almost, and this is what I would fain tell you about, if only I knew where to begin. For that matter, I have already begun. A man drifts exhausted over the ocean, and the complacent waters bring him to a ship, apparently deserted. Deserted as if the crew has just abandoned it, for Roberto struggles back to the cookroom and finds a lamp there and a flint and steel, as if the cook set them in their place before going to bed. But the two berths beside the furnace, one above the other, are both empty. Roberto lights the lamp, looks around and finds a great quantity of food, dried fish, hard tack with only a few patches of mould, easily scraped away with a knife. The fish is very salty, but there is water in abundance. It's all very mysterious, and Roberto does find that there is someone on the boat who is a priest. He is a Jesuit in a priest hole, and he pops out and becomes Roberto's friend and companion and teacher. And another weird quirk about this book, which is all about an obsession with time and going back in time, is there are many, many clocks on the boat, and they're constantly being wound up. And there's also many birds in cages which somehow relate to the clocks. And it's all relating to this obsession with finding lines of longitude, which was going on in the 17th century. It is a strange, wondrous, and beautiful book, and quite a complex one. So this time last year, as I was mentioning earlier, I was traveling across the Atlantic from New York to Southampton on the Queen Mary 2 with Damien, who was also on that boat. And we were also lucky enough to have among our number two writers who have written very successfully about islands, one of whom is Victoria Hislop, who wrote her book, The Island, which was inspired by her visit to an island called Spinalonga, which was an abandoned Greek leprosy colony in 2005. Her book, which is all about the romance and tragedy and treatment of lepers at that period, became an international bestseller and even a 26-part Greek TV series. And it is one of the most romantic and emotional books that I've ever read. It is really fantastic, and I'd strongly recommend all of you to read it. It's a lovely island book, and it's one of those books which I think is particularly intriguing because it's got that mystery at its heart of the leper colony. It's a forbidden place where no one is really allowed to go. And I personally find that really fascinating because when we lived in Trinidad when I was a child, there was a leper colony off the shores of Trinidad where nobody went, and it was an abandoned leper colony. And for some reason, eventually my mum did go to that place, and she found a deserted church, and she brought back a pew, which we still have in our house in England to this day. It was a completely abandoned place, I hasten to add. So anyway, that's an interesting aside. But The Island by Victoria Hislop was an excellent read. And thanks, Tamzin Gamble, for coming in and agreeing with me there. All of her books are great, and I would say go and read them if you haven't done so already. They're also great on audio. Also, on the boat, the Queen Mary 2, this time last year, literally November the 11th, we were also very lucky to be in the company of Louis de Bernieres, who wrote one of the most successful island books of the last 50 years, Captain Corelli's Mandolin, which is a multi-million best-selling novel and also became a film. And this is a book set on the island of Kefalonia, and it all takes place during the Second World War. It explores many different varieties of love, from lust-based love between the heroine Pelagia, not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, Pelagia, and Mandras, who is her first love, who looks like a Greek god and is very memorably described as having absolutely perfect buttocks, which get full of little shards of pottery, which has to be taken out by Pelagia's father. So we have the kind of love which is based on physical passion between Pelagia and Mandras. And we also have much more slow developing love, the love between Corelli, Captain Corelli, the man from the title of the book, and Pelagia, which is a very gentle, slow developing kind of love. And there's also the paternal love of Dr. Yanis for Pelagia. So it's a book which explores love in all its many forms, and it was, I think, so successful because the characterization is so in-depth, and also there's incredibly passionate scenes in battles and war. There's also self-sacrificing love between some of the characters who sacrifice themselves as soldiers for each other. And Captain Corelli is one of the most oft quoted novels because of its amazingly beautiful exploration of love, it's very frequently used in wedding ceremonies as a description, as a passage to read out about slow developing love. So I'm going to read you that passage briefly because it is such a beautiful passage, and it is one which I think is relevant to all long-term couples. So it's very good bibliotherapy for anyone in a long-term relationship. Love is a temporary madness. It erupts like volcanoes and then subsides. And when it subsides, you have to make a decision. You have to work out whether your roots have so entwined together that it is inconceivable that you should ever part, because that is what love is. Love is not breathlessness. It is not excitement. It is not the promulgation of eternal passion. That is just being in love, which any fool can do. Love itself is what is left over when being in love has burned away. And this is both an art and a fortunate accident. Those that truly love have roots that grow towards each other underground. And when all the pretty blossom have fallen from their branches, they find that they are one tree and not two. That is a really lovely passage. And if there are any people out there that haven't yet read Captain Corelli's Mandolin, it is a really beautiful, gorgeous book, and it really stands the test of time. I've been rereading it over the last few days and loving it once again. So do have a read of that. It's also a book which makes many a nod to Homer's Odyssey. And of course, Homer's Odyssey is a story which visits many islands, including the island of Circe. So obviously it would be a great idea to read Homer's Odyssey if you haven't already, but also you could visit the Odyssey in the form of Madeline Miller's Circe, which was written in 2018. And it's a really fun, enjoyable, great retelling of that classic story. I think some classical scholars get annoyed with it because it's not sticking absolutely to the text. Similarly, Madeline Miller wrote The Song of Achilles a few years before, which is her version of the love story between Achilles and Patroclus, who were also key figures in the Trojan War. And similarly, I think, although it's a massive hit, many a classical scholar was not thrilled with Madeline Miller because she was taking quite a few liberties with the classic story. However, I am a big fan of Circe and hugely enjoyed the book, which is Madeline Miller's version of the myth of Circe, who is a divine kind of demigod who was the daughter of Helios, the sun god, and Perse, or Perse, a nymph. And she was called Circe because of her yellow eyes, because Circe means hawk. And Circe, from the start, is a very individual character. And I think this is backed up in Homer's Odyssey. And she falls in love with a fisherman, a human, non-divine fisherman called Glaukos. And she goes against the advice of the gods and makes him divine by giving him the right potions. And she becomes a very impressive maker of potions and herbalist throughout her life. And Glaukos becomes a trident-wielding, rather terrifying god who lives in the sea. But he immediately gets bored of Circe because she's not beautiful enough, and he turns his attentions to a nymph called Scylla. And Scylla is a beautiful nymph at the beginning of the book, but Circe is so infuriated and jealous of Scylla that she uses her rather alarming arts to turn Scylla into a six-headed, incredibly ugly and terrifying creature. And many of you may be familiar with the myth of Scylla and Charybdis, where Odysseus has to go in between two terrible possible fates. One is Scylla with her six heads, which might kill him, and indeed does kill lots of his crew. And Charybdis is the enormous whirlpool which his boat could be sucked into. Of course, Odysseus survives, but lots of his fellow men get killed on the way. So the book Circe by Madeline Miller all takes place on her island, where she goes to live after she's been banished by the gods because of her evil doing with Scylla. And she lives on this island very happily, but whenever any humans come to visit her, she turns them into pigs. And when Odysseus's crew come to visit her on the island, they get turned into pigs too. But of course, Odysseus takes a potion to prevent himself from being turned into a pig, and he inevitably becomes Circe's lover, and together they bear a son, Telemachus. And this story, the Madeline Miller version, also features Daedalus and Icarus. So it's a story with a lot of familiar people in it from your knowledge of classical mythology. But I just love the way that Madeline Miller brings them all to life and gives them new, wonderful ways of being understood. And it is also a very feminist version of the story. So Circe by Madeline Miller is a great one for you to find too. A couple of other fantastic recent novels that I'd love to mention, which feature islands very heavily, are A Theatre for Dreamers by Polly Sampson, which is set on the Greek island of Hydra. And I'm not going to talk about it in detail now because I have spoken about it on another session, but it's a lovely sun-drenched book which is full of beautiful, dreamy hippies. It's set in the 1960s, and it also stars Leonard Cohen, and it's to some extent based on real events. Also, another excellent modern island book is Miss Benson's Beetle, which I have also talked about in a previous chat during one of these lockdown bibliotherapy sessions. But Miss Benson's Beetle takes Miss Benson and the reader to an island far, far away beyond the coast of Australia, where she is in search of a mythical, or actually, is it real, golden beetle. And that's a really wonderful book which takes you to this very distant island and takes you on a wonderful adventure with Miss Benson. So those are some excellent current novels all about islands, which are really fantastic escapism, I would say, just pure escapism. But I would also like to mention this lovely book, Sea Room, which was brought to my attention by regular watchers on these sessions, David Meager and his wife Estelle, who are here tonight, I think. Thanks for coming again. And thanks for recommending me this excellent book, which is not a novel. It's a true story about Adam Nicholson, who is a man who was lucky enough to inherit 3 islands called the Shiants. I think it might be Shants, might be the correct pronunciation, which are off the coast of Scotland, very close to Lewis. He inherited these islands in 1981 from his father, and he inherited them not because his father was a very rich laird in Scotland or an aristocrat, but simply because his father I think was clearly a huge romantic who obviously saw that the islands were for sale and decided to buy them almost on a whim. And he saw the potential for something absolutely life-changing by buying something so completely bizarrely beautiful and highly impractical. And this book is Adam Nicholson's song of praise to those islands, really. And it's all about the nature, the people, the history, the navigation of those islands. And it really is a lovely book. And thanks so much for that recommendation. I will read you a little bit so that you get a flavour of the beauty and of the writing of this book. For the last 20 years, I have owned some islands. They are called the Shiants, one definite softened syllable, the Shantiles, like a sea shanty, but with the Y trimmed away. The rest of the world thinks there is nothing much to them. Even on a map of the Hebrides, the tip of your little finger would blot them out, and if their 550 acres of grass and rock were buried deep in the mainland of Scotland as some unconsidered slice of moor on which a few sheep grazed, no one would ever have noticed them. But the Shiants are not like that. They are not modest. They stand out high and undoubtable, 4 miles or so off the coast of Lewis, surrounded by tide rips in the Minch, with black cliffs 500 feet tall, dropping into a cold, dark, peppermint sea, with seals lounging at their feet, the lobsters picking their way between the boulders and the kelp, and thousands upon thousands of seabirds wheeling above the rocks. In summer, the grass on the cliff tops is thick with flowers, bog asphodel and bog pimpernel, branched orchids, the stars of Tormentil and milkwort. Under such skies can be expected no great exuberance of vegetation, Dr. Johnson wrote, but this miniature spangle of Hebridean flora, never protruding its yellows and deep purples more than an inch or two above the turf, is a great and scarcely regarded treasure. I often think of it when in England, when I walk on expensive Persian rugs, the same points of dense, discreet colour, the same proportion of ground to decoration. A sudden flash of the Hebrides in a rich man's room. It is a private signal to me, a bleeping underfoot, winking through the burr of conversation and offered drinks. Remember me. At times in these last 2 decades, these islands have been the most important thing in my life. They are a kind of heartland for me, a core place. My father bought them over 60 years ago for £1,400. He gave them to me when I was 21, in 4 years, and I shall give them to my son Tom when he is 21 in 4 years' time. So that gives you an inkling of the loveliness of this book. But I love the way he writes about the people there, the history of the islands, the sea itself, and the way that he has to get to know the sea in order to feel truly part of the island. He's very passionate about these islands, and he talks about how they have shaped him, how they have turned him into the person that he is, and how he can never leave them. They will never leave him, and he can never leave them. And he's very divided about the idea of the fact that he's going to give them on to his son. But this is also a very beautiful idea. So it is a really inspiring book that really makes you want to go to the Scottish Islands. And while I was researching about islands for tonight's bibliotherapy session, I discovered many lovely island books set in Scottish islands particularly. And I wondered why that might be the case. I don't know if any of you Scottish folk out there might have ideas about why there's so many excellent books set on those misty isles. One of the ones that I read recently is The Story Keeper by Anna Mazzola, which is set on Skye, which is kind of a murder mystery. It tells the story of Audrey Hart, who is a girl in her 20s escaping from a dominant father and a frustrating romantic situation, who has gone to help her this lady that she knows who's an older relative to collect folk tales from the people of Skye, but she's viewed with great suspicion because this is 1857 and nobody really trusts her and the lady that she's helping to find these stories. It's very atmospheric as she goes among the people of Skye and tries to collect their tales, and they are very resistant to talking to her, but she does slowly begin to extract stories, and meanwhile various young girls are disappearing and then found washed up by the sea, dead, in one case with her eyes removed, and in another case there's an amazing murmuration of birds which appears when her body is found. So there's all sorts of terrible portents and strange events which are happening while she's exploring the folk tales, and we slowly realize that there may be connections also with her own mother's disappearance in her childhood. So it's a very creepy, excellent book by Anna Mazzola set on the Isle of Skye. Another book that came to my attention while thinking about tonight was I Am an Island by Tamzin Khalidas, which is set in a remote island in the Outer Hebrides. It's not a novel, it's a memoir of her experience of going with her husband to try and escape the rat race in London, and slowly her marriage then disintegrating, and her discovery of her own inner resources, which you could say that it's a memoir slightly in the style of The Salt Path by Raina Wynne, which I talked about in another session. But it's a really interesting book which has been very highly recommended. So that's also a great non-fiction example. Another book that I was recommended by some of you, which I haven't actually read tonight, but I'd love to share with you because it sounds great, is Sleep by C.L. Taylor, which is set on the island of Rum off Scotland. So it's another Scottish island book, which is a murder mystery. It's about Anna, who can't sleep. She has crushing insomnia, terrifying night terrors, and memories of something that are making her feel terribly guilty, and she can't sleep. To escape her past, she takes a job on the remote island of Rum, and she's joined by 7 guests on that island. But it seems that each of those guests has a secret. One of them is lying about who they are and what they're doing on the island, and possibly one of them will never wake up. So that sounds like a great murder mystery by C.L. Taylor. That came highly recommended to one of our regular viewers. And I'd just like to mention also that Frankenstein has a bit of a spell on the Orkney Islands when Mary Shelley takes her Dr. Frankenstein there when he's feeling full of guilt and woe about what he's created, and he's trying to create a Mrs. Frankenstein. So that's another moment in the Scottish Islands. That's where it's all happening, particularly with some of the darker sides of the islands, perhaps. And talking of dark sides of islands, this amazing graphic novel is called The Island, which is by Armin Greda. And it's a really very bleak but brilliant book about really prejudice and negativity when somebody is washed up on an island. this is what happens when this poor naked man arrives on the island. He is taken in, but by very unfriendly people who fear the sea and fear him and resent him. And they put him in a goat pen. So they kind of pretend to look after him, but they're not really looking after him. They give him scraps of food to live on, but they're all more and more scared of him, seeing him as a terrifying outsider. And they decide that he's no good for their community. They do give him work, but it's all rather grim and depressing. And I won't tell you the whole story, but it's very much a story of our time about immigration and about what might happen if we don't welcome in people from the outside. This is a really good and powerful book, which I very much recommend. Moving on to more positive, light and bright island literature, having dwelt a little bit on the darker side, Tove Jansson is one of my favourite authors, and I'm just going to grab a book of hers to show you. This is her biography, and it is a really fantastic book, a bit of a tome. But the book I wanted to talk about by her this evening is The Summer Book, which I'm sure many of you will have read, and many of you have actually mentioned as an island book to recommend, which is a wonderful book about a grandmother and her granddaughter spending a summer on an island off the coast of Finland, where they have obviously been many times before, and you slowly realise that the girl has lost her mother and the grandmother has lost her daughter, and the two are together, spending the summer together. And it's an amazingly wonderful, understated story. It's quite a slim book. I don't have my copy because I foolishly lent it to someone. It's about the same size as this book, which is one of her children's books. And it's very beautiful, very sparsely expressed, but very much a story that lives with you forevermore. And I'm just going to read you a little bit about the book, written by Ali Smith, who is a big fan of Tove Jansson. Every children's book should have a path in it where the writer stops and the child goes on, Jansson said. So that's Tove Jansson talking about her children's books, which she is much more famous for, such as the Moomin books. A threat or a delight that can never be explained, a face never completely revealed. Her fiction for adults is even more deft and knowing when it comes to things said and unsaid, and it's hard to describe the astonishing achievement of Jansson's artistry in the Summer Book. The writing so lightly kept, so simple seeming, so closely concerned with the weighing of moments that any extra weight of exegesis is too much. So that's Ali Smith raving about the wonders of Tove Jansson, particularly with regard to the Summer Book. But she is also an amazingly brilliant writer for children. And if none of you have read any of her Moomin books, I would start with Moomin Papa at Sea, which is a book all about an island. And it's about Moomin Papa, who is a kind of everyman, who decides one day that he must start afresh because Moomin Troll, his son, is nearly grown up. He feels like he's not really needed. He wants to start a new project, and he decides that he's going to find an island with a lighthouse and be the lighthouse keeper. So he sets off to look for his lighthouse, and he actually finds it, but he takes his whole family there and he forces them to come with him on his adventure. And Moomin Mama really doesn't want to go with him. She is very happy being the matriarch of the family and being in charge. And it's really very much about adult relationships, which is the reason that I love these books so much, and the reason I think they're great for adults to read, because it's all about really empty nest syndrome and the idea of your kids not really needing you anymore, or about being a middle-aged man and woman and having to deal with the next stage of life. So Tove Jansson takes her characters, puts them on this island in the middle of the sea, where they have to deal with the elements and with not having that much to do. And Moomin Mama finds it very, very difficult, and she actually gets depressed. And it's a story which is very much like The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, in which Moomin Mama actually ends up getting behind the mural that she that she paints herself. So she paints a mural, and then one day her family come into the room in the lighthouse that she's painted, and they can't see her, and they slowly realize that she's actually gone into the mural and she's trapped behind the paint, which is all quite terrifying and very much about her depression. And also, there's quite a lot of discussion of what Moomin Papa's doing and how he is managing his own midlife crisis. I will read you a tiny bit. We might go a little bit past 10 o'clock, as we started a tiny bit late because of the glitch I was having on Facebook. Sorry about that. I do apologise. Moomin Papa went and sat in the lighthouse keeper's ledge in the cliff, looking as though he was the figurehead in the bows of a galleon, the island. This was the real storm he had waited for, but it wasn't what he'd imagined it to be. No beautiful pearls of foam on the waves, no, not in a wind force 8. Instead, the foam was blown off the surface of the sea like angry grey smoke, and the water was lined and furrowed like a face wrinkled with age. Suddenly, in the way it can happen to a troll, Moomin Papa found it terribly easy to start talking to the sea. Silently, of course. You're much too grown up to show off like this. It's unworthy of you. Is it really so important to you to frighten a poor little island like this? It has a tough enough time right out here as it is. You ought to be happy that it's here. What fun would you have without its rocks to wash your breakers over? Think carefully now. Here's a little tuft of trees growing all bent for your sake, and a handful of scanty soil, which you do your best to wash away, and a few rugged rocks, which you polish so smooth that there's hardly anything left of them. And then you've the nerve to frighten them. There's a picture of the sea crashing onto the island. Moomin Papa leant forward and stared sternly at the fuming sea. There's something you don't seem to understand, he said. It's your job to look after this island. You should protect and comfort it instead of behaving as you do. Do you understand? Moomin Papa listened, but the sea made no answer. In this book, the Groke also stars, and the Groke is one of my favourite characters in the Moomin Troll books, because the Groke is a creature who exudes loneliness and cold, and she sucks the warmth out of anyone around her. She is a living embodiment of depression. There she is, the Groke. But really, she's just very lonely, and she spends lots of her time looking in through windows, wishing that she was inside. So we started with looking at this book, Island Dreams by Gavin Francis, but I haven't really had time to talk about it. It's a very beautifully produced book, as you can see, by Canongate, and it's a really lovely, wonderful, personal exploration of Gavin Francis's obsession with islands. And you can see that I've put loads of sticky notes in it because it's full of just beautiful quotes about islands, about why Gavin loves Ireland so much, and it's full of lovely anecdotes from his many travels around islands during his life. So Gavin Francis is a doctor living in Edinburgh, and he has spent much of his life exploring islands because he's obsessed with them and loves them. And he collects all kinds of wonderful tales in this gorgeous book, all about different aspects of islands, different islands that he's visited, and different folklore of islands too. And it makes an excellent read as well, rather like The Sea Room. It's a book that's beautifully written and full of lovely ideas, very highly recommended. And you can actually hear more from Gavin Francis on the Big Scottish Book Club, which is Damien Barr's fantastic TV series, which is on every Sunday evening at 10 p.m. It's on BBC Scotland, but you can watch it live on BBC iPlayer, and you can, of course, catch up with it on BBC iPlayer. Gavin Francis is in the 2nd episode, and this Sunday will be the 4th episode. They're all really fantastic. I've been loving them. Neil Gaiman makes an appearance. There's all kinds of amazing authors, and I would very much recommend going to see them on iPlayer. And don't forget too that you can now catch all of or many of Damien Barr's Salon episodes on our new Salon on Demand facility, which you can find past online salon sessions with people such as S.J. Watson, Dolly Alderton, Rachel Joyce, all kinds of amazing authors, just for the price of a drink. It's a £5, and you can then watch them as often as you want. You can find them on our Facebook page on the Book Now button, and also on Instagram. You can find them on the link in our bio on Instagram. So thanks so much for joining me again tonight. Oh, Colleen, I'm sad to hear that you can't watch it in the US. I wonder why that is. I'll look into that and message you. Next month in December, I'm going to be doing a session about snow in literature, which I'm very much looking forward to. So watch out for notifications about that. That will be on a Wednesday night, mid-December, all about snow. And in the meantime, check out our Facebook page and Instagram for any other exciting events coming up. Thanks for joining me, and see you soon. Good night.